the many forms of speech through which artists push boundaries, shape social narratives, and challenge convention, music is perhaps the most persuasive. Known internationally as the seat of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Cleveland provides the perfect forum to discuss free speech in the context of the music industry. To lead our conversation today, we welcome Dr. Lauren Onkey, who joined the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum in 2008 as Vice President of Education and Public Programs after 14 years as an English professor at Ball State University in Indiana. Her research and teaching explores the intersection of popular music and cultural studies, literature and women's studies. She has published essays and book chapters on Van Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, U2, and Bruce Springsteen. And her book, Blackness and Transatlantic Irish Identity, Celtic Soul Brothers, was published by Routledge in 2009. Her seminal exhibition at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum, Women Who Rock, opened to great acclaim in February 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lauren Onkey.
Thank you, Leon. It's great to be here. This is a really important subject for us at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and when we started planning this panel, I really started with these guys, so it's great to have them here. Let me introduce everybody. Chuck D, artist, author, social activist. Chuck D, of course, helped create politically and socially conscious rap music with the groundbreaking band Public Enemy that is still out there playing. He's co-hosted Unfiltered on the Air on Air America Radio, testified before Congress in support of peer-to-peer MP3 sharing, and is involved in many, many political projects. He co-wrote the essay book Fight the Power, Rap, Race, and Reality. And Chuck continues to work as an activist, publisher, lecturer, and visual artist. Kembrew McLeod, Associate Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Iowa and a documentary filmmaker. Kembrew's books and films focus on both popular music and the cultural impact of intellectual property law. His Freedom of Expression, Resistance and Repression in the Age of Intellectual Property received the American Library Association's Book Award for Best Scholarship in the area of intellectual freedom in 2006. His most recent documentary, Copyright Criminals, aired on PBS's Emmy Award-winning documentary series, Independent Lens. Dave Marsh, rock critic, rock historian, anti-censorship activist, and radio host. He co-founded Cream, the great and legendary Detroit rock magazine. He's written for Rolling Stone, Newsday, Playboy, The Village Voice, authored more than 20 books, and edits the long-running music and politics newsletter Rock and Rap Confidential. He hosts 2 shows on Sirius Radio, Kick Out the Jams, which explores the intersections between music and politics, and Live from the Land of Hope and Dreams, Straight Up Politics. No, 3 radio shows. His also, how could I forget this one? His show on the Bruce Springsteen, on the E Street Radio channel on Springsteen. And finally, Terry Stewart, President and CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum here in Cleveland. Terry has been President and CEO of the museum since 1999. He also owns more than 500,000 records, which is relevant. He's on the board of the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, serves as an advisor for the Summer Stage Concert Series in Central Park. Locally, he serves on the boards for the Cleveland Film Commission, Positively Cleveland, and the Diversity Center of Northeast Ohio. Welcome, guys. It's great to have you all here. Terry, we open with a few clips from our Don't Knock the Rock exhibit in the museum, and I wonder if you could maybe get us started by talking briefly about why this subject is important to us at the museum, the way that popular music is this place where people fight out the issues we've been talking about all day.
Well, I think I tour people probably 7 days a week down there, and when I get to the section of Don't Knock the Rock, they're usually shocked that we've taken up some real estate on this subject. But you really back it up and say, when this place was opened, 16 years ago, there was a lot of issues. Why would you have a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? So one of the issues that we battle on a constant basis is the way this music has impacted the world, our culture, and history. There's no better way than seeing this exhibit where we sort of march you through the times from the 1950s. You saw the preacher up there railing against the beat. He's still in the pulpit. He's down in Florida. He's mellowed a bit. He's okay with the music today, so I'm glad to report that. But then it goes all the way up through the 80s when some of these folks here next to me were a part of that. So it's very important to really immediately hit somebody in the face when they walk in the museum and say, this is a tourist destination, but in terms of the raison d'etre for this museum, it's very important that we educate people about how this music impacted the world, and certainly in the area of freedom of speech, going from the beginnings of recorded music when the earliest point, particularly of black blues being recorded in the 1920s, all the way up to we have the seminal moments, the really sort of flashpoint of hip-hop and the stuff that Chuck and Public Enemy did, where we really finally knocked the doors down. It's all right there, and those who tour can pull it out of the material that's in the museum. So it's important. It's very important to us.
Chuck, when you were coming up, just wanting to get into music, was part of the kind of politics you heard in the music something that drew you to it? Did you see it as kind of a vehicle?
Yes, I came from a different time. I was born in 1960. So when I was coming out of college, that was definitely during the time of R&B, but that R&B was Reagan and Bush. Mm-hmm. And I learned from artists like Curtis Mayfield and James Brown and Aretha Franklin, and that they actually spoke from their soul down to their bone. I mean, they was true to it. And rap music, I just thought that a lot of people were kind of following the line of commerce. And kind of, if they were told that they would have a great career without really saying what they felt, I thought that was the way of the walk at that particular time. And I wanted to be true to how it felt, but also I had to be true to myself. So I had an advantage of being maybe 10 years or 7 years older than most artists at that time who were highly impressionable in high school. I'll do anything to be loved. Mm. And I noticed that had always been a black trait in music, that I knock on America's door and please love me sometimes, but sometimes the controversial point of view was like, I don't care if you love me or not, so I decided to take that route. You're gonna know about me. But I noticed that later on in the 90s, once corporations felt that they found the DNA into that rebellion, then I saw a lot of that as being contrived. So I tell artists alongside me and even after me, just say, just be true to your bone and go from there. And if they call it controversial, understand that it's just your point of view versus theirs. So just don't try to contrive controversy like it's made up in some kind of creative pot. Just be yourself.
It's interesting because when you think about the first generation of rock and rollers, the guys who, the big bang of the 50s, they weren't necessarily going in there trying to have people, riot at shows and have people flip out. I mean, but it's a response to kind of what they were putting out that got everybody worked up.
It had to feel right. It had to, and I think this is some of the things in music, and especially in the beginnings of hip-hop, there was no ulterior motive other than the fact that it had to feel right. And if it didn't feel right, people wouldn't just leave what you were doing. They would get mad and may come at you. So that was something that you had to kind of abide by. You had to deal with that. You had to deal with like being the best you could be because you actually are taking up somebody's time to watch you on the turntables, on the microphone. I thought at a lot of times that when people got on the microphone, they would just kind of disrupt the party because they weren't good enough. So if you're getting your dance on and somebody gets on the microphone, they're whack. People are like, they need to get the fuck off the microphone. Yeah. Messing up my party. So I had to feel right.
Chuck talked about corporations kind of coming in and seeing what would work. Kembrew, I wonder if you could throw sort of in the mix here how we might think about the impact of corporations' intellectual property law on artistic expression, because it's not just we've got the music and people can hear it and their ideas are out there.
So yeah, it's 1989, 90, and all of a sudden, all my favorite artists start getting sued, De La Soul and Bismarcky and others. And this is a time when no one was thinking about copyright. It was a really, really obscure law. I mean, people in the music industry, especially song publishers, understood copyright, but lay people like us, and people out in the audience didn't matter and didn't care about it. So what happens is, after about 6 years of the introduction of the digital sampler, and basically everyone's, dissing hip-hop, saying that it's just a fad. I was working at a record store. I heard that all the time. And my theory is, and you can back me up or not, but because it was kind of an under-the-radar musical movement, these artists took this new technology, digital samplers, and just did whatever they wanted with it. And the creative window was wide open. And that's what Public Enemy did, De La Soul, plenty of others. They released those records for the most part without even clearing licenses at the time in the 80s because, again, no one cared about the music in terms of corporate culture because it wasn't making money. So all of a sudden, by the early 1990s, after all these lawsuits, the law basically changed the course of the music, and the music was going to evolve anyway in different directions, but it basically shut off a really, really creative moment, potential in the music. And so here's one example. Let's say Fight the Power has 20 samples. I'm not going to list them where, I don't want to get Chuck in trouble, but let's say...
We're talking about the Isley Brothers.
Right. Well, you intentionally named it Fight the Power and intentionally avoided the Isley Brothers song sampling it. But anyway, let's say there are 20 samples in Fight the Power. That's actually 40 different copyright holders you have to go to because you have to get permission from the record company for the sound recording and then the song publishing company for the underlying composition. Now, administratively, that's just impossible, negotiating with 40 different rights holders. So the reason why most people associate sampling today with just kind of an uncreative loop from a hit from the 80s is because just bureaucratically, economically, it became impossible to make the classic records like Fear of Black Planet, Takes a Nation of Millions or whatever. And so it's in that sense that, it is a free speech issue or a free expression issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Chuck, did you feel that when that law started to change and the whole challenge and lawsuits on you about sampling, did you feel that as a form of censorship at the time?
In a way, but we knew that the people that would come at you would be large portions of establishment, meaning that the reason that the sampling came up versus I guess hip-hop artists making original beats on machines, and it's just that the songs and the grooves and the musics had the best of musicianship ever. So I mean, you're tapping in, if you had to know the records as a DJ, and then you had to know the musicians as a DJ of the records, and you had to know the labels. So getting a piece of that magic and rearranging it was art in itself. But because the independents in the middle of the 80s, they were under the radar. And they were kicking the majors' ass. So we were signed to a major making music with, original music and all. And the music that was getting a buzz happened to be from the undercurrent with their particular technique of taking sampling at a certain level. We just took it to the next level because we're saying, well, you guys are ending up wanting to do business with these guys but not knowing the reason why. They're hot. And so it happened to be, by 89, like Kembrew said, the majors didn't know why these artists' music happened to have that extra kick to it. They just knew that, hey, we need to sign these guys. We need to get involved with them. They didn't know the dynamics. We knew the dynamics. And we said, look, man, being with a major, we have to operate just like these independents are doing, musically and thematically, and add a little bit of what we do to it.
Dave, you're in these debates a bit earlier in rock and roll history, back to the MC5 days.
Yeah, well, I'm 10
Detroit.
years older than Chuck, so of course that leaves me. I wasn't going to get into that.
I know you were.
Because we're friends.
Can you talk a little bit about something that precedes this, which is the PMRC hearings and debates?
No, the PMRC is exactly 89. I mean, but so let me precede it with something else, okay? Which is sort of why I got involved in this stuff in the first place, because it has everything to do with how the PMRC comes out, in my view, and why I was one of the people who instigated the fight back against them, which is simply that I got involved.
We should say Parents Music Resource Center.
Right, which was a group of housewives in Washington, D.C. That's how they were presented.
In 1986, I believe they started.
In 86 they started, but they really, the whole thing reaches its crescendo in 88 and 89 because of Fuck the Police by NWA. But 86 is that's your first album?
87, February.
Okay.
Well, March.
So it's coming, and you can see that it's aimed, where's it aimed? It's aimed at metal, it's aimed at rap. Who are the audiences for metal and rap? Working class kids, black and white. More crossover from white into the black rap, but also lots of black and particularly Hispanic kids listening to metal across nationwide. And the reason I got involved in all this was, number one, I was like 13 years old at the height of the civil rights movement. The only thing I could get my hands on was Curtis Mayfield, right? Or Smokey Robinson, or something like that, that gave me the metaphor to know why the cracker bullshit I was raised in up in Pontiac, Michigan was wrong. And then by the time I get to be like in the age Chuck was when he started making music, I was at Wayne State in Detroit, and there was this band down the street called the MC5. And they had this record called Kick Out the Jams. And it's a whole complicated thing. You know, they were basically a white R&B band that got psychedelicized. And they made this record called Kick Out the Jams, which began Kick Out the Jams, motherfuckers. And the cops came down. And the record company establishment came down. And so for me, in one way or another, that was how I got involved. I had that magazine Cream, and we did that. And so as this thing built up, you could see where it was coming from. And then it turns out, and this is, I think, speaks to the power, the singular power of that late 80s moment, because the struggle is really pretty naked. And it's because hip-hop was turning out to be the biggest revolution since the rock and roll stuff. Now, different people had different reasons in the 50s for not liking. A lot of people just didn't like rock and roll because, on the one hand, it was either black people, North and South, or it was white Southern working class people. They didn't like them. They didn't want them to have a voice. And so now you're coming up to a period where black teenagers, the most criminalized group, the most illicitly, you know, they got to have 14 different false reasons for it, but in reality, black teenagers, but young black men, are the most criminalized group in our society. And they were finding a voice. And their voice was not only a voice of hedonism, which in many cases it was also a voice of social criticism, beginning with the message by the Sugar Hill Gang, which is Grandmaster Flash, I'm sorry, which is like, what, 83?
83, yeah.
82.
So you could see this thing coming. The PMRC, so I called a guy at the Wall Street Journal. I'm doing a story about it for the Village Voice. And I said, well, you know, you had that story in there about this letter that the record company executives got from the guy at the record company lobby, called the RIAA, about this PMRC group, this Parents Music Resource Center. Can I see, how can I get a hold of this memo? He said, I'll send it to you. So he sends me the memo, which was bad enough, what their plan was. Their plan was to institute, you know how you get that box now on the network TV shows that says like 14 letters and numbers that you're supposed to be able to decipher so you can protect your children? You know, EX13DL, you know, which means like dirty language, exceptionally dirty language, nobody under 13. I don't know what it means. But they wanted to do that on record covers, right? Which already were going down to like, you know, this, because it was CD time. So then I turned over the page, and he shows this letter that he's gotten. Here's a copy of this letter he's gotten from the PMRC. And I look at the names. There are like 15 names. 16 of them are members of Congress, mostly senators. They're the wives of members of Congress. Mrs. Paul Simon, Mrs. Albert Gore. You know, it's not Tipper Gore, it's Mrs. Albert Gore. So they're throwing the weight, but they're trying to hide behind the Mrs., right? And the 16th name was Susan Baker. All she was the wife of the Secretary of State of the United States. So, okay, that recontextualizes everything, because now you're just down with what the game really is. The game is social repression. And they use in my view, they use the economic stuff, and what happened if the big record labels, the corporate record labels, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, they established Lyric Reviews Committee, which I believe still exists, so that and only certain kinds of records get this. Mostly hip-hop records get it, some metal records get it, Bruce Springsteen can say whatever the fuck he wants to and does. You're not going to see a label on that record. But if PE was still on Columbia or any other big label, they would have to deal with that, right? And they get told they can't. And that was deliberately to defang hip-hop,
Sure.
and to a lesser extent metal. And that's why when you get to 89, and this guy from the FBI, Milt Ulrich, writes a letter on FBI stationery saying that the FBI wants their NWA's record company to take the police off the stands, then that was the real fight. Because then they had reduced it to politics, to naked politics, right?
Terry, you've talked about that record a lot in NWA, and I know it's an issue sometimes that some people think that rap doesn't belong in the Rock Hall, and that's you argue fervently against that. Can you?
Yeah, I think you have to go back further. That there's a precedent for this happening in around 53 when Estes Kefauver gets involved with two worlds I'm familiar with, which is comic books, because I ran Marvel Comics. And there were 600 publishers of comic books in that time, and suddenly what Gaines was doing with all of his comics, which had about crime and dope and kidnapping, suddenly those words were prohibited, and overnight, I think something like, out of 600 publishers, something like 550 went out of business. Because no longer could they created the comic code, which is that little stamp, which is on the edge of comics. Which is
about 590, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, you had the majors who could survive. Wasn't Marvel at the time, it was under a different name, but DC. And the same situation. At the same time, you have the double entendre music that's largely, a lot of it coming out of Cincinnati on King Records, where Congress gets involved also, and suddenly all of the It Ain't the Meat, It's the Motion, My Baby Just Loves My Big 10-inch record of the blues, that goes away at the same time. Everybody sort of
Annie Had a Baby, all those songs. Work With Me, Annie.
Yeah, all those really sexual on time. And the record industry laid down completely, the comic industry restructured completely. But we talk about that mainly in the context you're asking, the fact that the music that hip-hop comes out of, this is just the natural evolution of this black music that comes off the streets of America. It's different instrumentations, it's more direct language, but it's certainly part of the rock and roll history that we talk about. It's nothing more than 50 years forward from when Alan Freed first used the term rock and roll in this town, and he knew what that term meant. And everybody was on his case about not using the term rock and roll because it meant sex, or meant fucking. Let's be honest about that. So I mean, yeah, there's a long lineage of that, and that's an educational lesson, as you know, as you're talking about, we try to keep involved there. So NWA comes along, which is really an extraordinary group of individuals that really just push the envelope completely right there. And it's a big issue for the museum, but it's one that we stand behind both artistically and in terms of integrity. It has to be part of our history. It has to be part of the music we celebrate.
Yeah, and then there's all kinds of pieces of this in between, whether it's John Lennon saying that the Beatles are bigger than Jesus, which was objectively a fact as far as teenagers went, and getting his records burnt, or whether it's the issue that comes up in 1982 when MTV shows up, or was it 81, whatever it was,
81.
Some dark day. And they say, well, our audience is white, and we don't, it's these cable subscribers, and they don't want to see black music. And finally, actually, a corporate record executive says, you're playing a Michael Jackson video, or you're not getting any more of our videos. Of course, they play Billie Jean, and it turns out that that's exactly what their audience wants. But those fights are, I mean, see, I guess what I'm trying to say is Terry's even righter than he thinks he is, because it wasn't like ever interrupted. It was always something.
It flares up. I mean,
And then it flares up and people notice it, but it's there every day. The pressure's there every day.
we also talk about, you often hear about right-wing conspiracies, but there's an underlying current that happens in the late 50s when Chuck Berry goes to prison, Zola goes to prison from the Platters, and Elvis goes in the Army.
His plane crashes.
And you have Freed and all the DJs being attacked about payola. And if eventually Freed is destroyed.
And payola was definitely a race-based issue. That's the reason Kefauver was one of the people who, even though he was a liberal senator for the South, and a Democrat, of course, Kefauver, that's one of the reasons why he's leading this charge. But that thing was about, they didn't want, they wanted that very limited small group of white people on Tin Pan Alley to write all the songs.
And again, if you look at the almost near destruction of ASCAP by the rise of rhythm and blues and rock and roll, because BMI is created in 1941, which is a separate group that collects royalties. But ASCAP was the 10,000-pound gorilla that seldom let a black artist or a hillbilly artist into their circle of friends and collected their money, collected the royalties, and paid it off.
The only one that was in that I can think of was Duke Ellington, and he got in only because his manager, Irving Mills, put his name also on the records, mostly to steal records money from Duke, but it was also to get Duke into ASCAP.
Chuck, did you, as an artist, did you feel like you knew you were walking into these kinds of battles when you first started to record with PE?
From minute one. Bill Adler, my great friend, publicist, writer, Def Jam Records, I'd seen the press just jump all over Run DMC during their misunderstanding of this incident that took place in Long Beach, California. And it was the final straw that said, you know what? Since they're looking at rap music and hip-hop from a one-sided glass, I could feel equipped to jump in here and defend the art form, but also understand I'm going to take some hits too. And I'm going to be swinging at the same time. From the period of 1989 to 1993, you had some seismic events that threw the free speech out of hip-hop from a political perspective, reflective aspect that hasn't returned to this day. In 1989, my group was being called anti-Semitic. NWA had Fuck the Police. In 1991, Sister Soldier, who's affiliated with us, was considered, being an anti-patriot because she said that black kids, she was misinterpreted by the Clinton campaign. Then you had Ice-T, who had Cop Killer.
It was a hip-hop record, but it got blamed on hip-hop.
Yeah, well, because he was a hip-hop guy. In that 4-year period, what has been a successful coup by I would say, the propaganda to the right and the corporations that said, you know what, we want black culture, but we want it under our terms so it's really palatable and easy to sell. What you've had is you've had a silencing of actual social commentary and reflection of what's going on. Because the NWA, they couldn't do Fuck the Police, but they was able to put out niggas for life. So they could be blasphemous towards black people and it's under the radar because basically, well, they're talking about themselves or they're shooting themselves. They're gangster rap. Yeah, that's them. And if it goes to white kids, fine, because it's only black on black and we all need to learn about each other. But when it went towards the establishment, there was like, we just can't have that. Even record company executives was like, it's easy for you people to fight each other, but once you start pointing your fingers at me, we got a problem because I'm not the victim here. So we've seen, it might be my point of view, but if you look back to that 4-year period, it was a silencing of the art form in one category, but also a total freedom of speech one-sidedly towards the people in the other aspect. So it says, you know what, you guys got the freedom of speech to say whatever, but just don't say this. Like it's always, Ice-T had an album called Freedom of Speech, but watch what you say. It was like that was the mode of hip-hop from 1993 right to this minute now, where if you had to comb through the commentary of what's being reflected in this society from a mainstream and from a large commercial aspect, the music has been emptied. But it has been emptied by that 4-year period and whatever came out of that 4-year period. I didn't curse much in my records, so they threw a parental advisory sticker on me on Fear of a Black Planet. Maybe because of the words fear and black, And they say, by the way, he's anti-Semitic, and that, you could check the music all you want. It's almost like the ridiculousness that's going on right now where
we're going to take Hank Williams' song off of NFL Monday Night because he said the president was a Hitler. Well, we know Hank Williams Jr. might be an asshole. But the song ain't got nothing to do with anything but football. Oh, no, but it's associated. So that just sounds like somebody from the right side making a liberal judgment call to make themselves kind of seem like, okay, you know, we're doing the right thing, huh? We're allowing you to say things. We're allowing freedom of speech. But, you know, but you can't say that.
Until you say something. You know, I mean, I sat through the BBC thing here, and I thought the most confusing thing about it was, does anybody understand what freedom is? Freedom is what happens when you say something somebody disagrees with. There is no freedom of speech until you have that argument. That's when it starts. We can argue about where it ends, but it don't start until we have the disagreement. And the fact that you don't like me saying this or that about your religion, that means you're supposed to speak back, louder if you can. But there's this whole idea that if we just be nice and not say what we really think, we'll have a better society. And that's how, when you have a society that's run that way, that's how you get Poland after the fall of, you know, the Warsaw Pact country, the Soviet Union, whatever, which is a country with no Jews, and you have anti-Semitism as an issue in the presidential election. Because it drives people crazy if they can't say what they really think. Because they don't ever get a chance to be corrected.
I think artists should say what they really, really feel. If they're led to say something that they really, really don't believe because they think it will be highly popular or highly unpopular, I think that's wrong. It's just like you just can't just say, oh, well, I'm just going to say something I don't believe. I get on artists all the time. I'm like, say, do you really believe that? Yeah, but you know, this is what's going to work. And I'm like, say, well, I can't work with you then. I don't care how much money it's going to bring in, because I would rather go into the dog food industry rather than, you know, work with something that, you know, I don't believe. And you know, you have people that start controversies and say things that they have no idea about just because they think it's a freedom of speech. I think that abuses freedom of speech when you just putting it out there, but you really didn't put any, you know, any thought to what you're saying. And I tell people, hey, you know, if I'm writing a song, you know, I ain't freestyling off the top of my head. I'm going to put some thought into what I'm going to say, just like in a conversation. I'm not just going to just mumble everything based on emotion only. I have to take it in consideration as a listener too. But I've seen over, like I said, in the last 20 years, I've seen so many derogatory things said in black music that's been sanctioned by companies and by managers and by lawyers.
On the other hand,
that totally just like say, well, there's an imbalance here, and something has opened the faucet on one thing and closed it on another.
On the other hand, the only people who went to jail were Two Live Crew, and they weren't singing about politics, they were singing about pussy. That's using Two Live Crew language, not necessarily Dave Marsh language.
I just saw you shaking for a second.
But you know, really, you know, you got to deal with, and this goes back to some things we said earlier today. You live in a country where somebody in the lifetime of everyone who's old enough to be in this room, where somebody went to jail, even for one night, in this country for singing a song.
Yeah, I had some friends, a friend of mine, Tim Quirk, who is in a band called Too Much Joy.
Yeah.
They wanted to, they're a white, like, power pop band and from the late 80s, and they wanted to test out whether, because Two Live Crew had gone to jail, so they're a white group, so they flew down to Miami and performed Fort Lauderdale and performed as nasty as they want to be. And sure enough, they were all arrested except for the drummer who didn't sing because he was drumming. and their drummer also was a New York City police officer, so he ran out the back because he didn't want to get arrested. So it was a cop fleeing from the police, I guess.
Well, I tell you,
but that's just amazing. It's just mind-blowing to wrap your head around that people went to jail as, you know,
not in Tunisia
20 years ago.
And not for something as
pussy.
substantial as a religious disagreement, for singing a goddamn song about sex. Went to jail. And people aren't even outraged by that in this country. People think that's moral.
well, I remember one time we were playing with Ice-T, and this was 1992. We're playing the University of Maryland, so we're playing in that area. Oh, it could have been, I think, the area of Penn, either Penn or Maryland, one of the two, because we did back-to-back gigs. And there was just so many police that were ready to do Iceberg in. They were like, look, he does Cop Killer, we're taking him in. F what anybody says. So we're backstage. I said, we're a tight genre constituency. We're peers. We respect each other's stance. At least that's how it used to be. And I'm not coming with that's how it used to be state, but right now the hip-hop industry is a little fragmented out. But back then we was a solid unit. And we told ICE, look, we'll do Cop Killer. So we closed the show to a Cop Killer, and the cops were like, So yeah, you always have to like figure out like if the point of view that you want to get. You always got to understand that there's adversaries, and no matter what you do, but you just gotta hold to your stance. And the whole stance that I tried to say all the time, that we were pro-human race. We're pro-black, because we understand the situation we're in. But you got to speak up for what you see. You got to speak up for what your rights. But that's how I was raised. And I wasn't raised to be a songwriter. I wasn't raised to be a recording artist. I was raised to grow from a child to an adult and have control of my capacities in my speech and my mind as much as I possibly can. They just happen to transfer over into songwriting because, I'm a grown person, human being, man first, black man first. I'm going to therefore write a song based on me holding my head up high. And that's where that came from. And why should you become less of a person once you start making songs? I'm a full person, but when I write songs and when I do art, I reduce myself. And that's just a ridiculous notion. I don't know where that comes from.
I think both rock and roll and rap. Rock and roll's old now, right? It's been around a long time. We have a museum, which people tend to make us think of as, it's tenured. It makes us, in your establishment now, da-da-da-da. But it's still art that isn't fully respected compared to a lot of the other arts. In terms of teaching it to kids, it's still kind of a challenge.
Well, then there's the interesting question of whether we entirely want it to be.
Well, sure we do.
No.
Why would we?
Not in the same way, because we don't want it to be embalmed.
Well,
because getting old is good, dying is bad.
well, I think that's one of the things that keeps coming up in these cyclical debates too, because even people who grew up in rock and roll in a particular era,
But the new rock and roll,
like something
the younger
else
rock and
that's
roll is
coming
more
up.
dead than the older rock and roll. That's the weird part about it, and that has everything to do with these issues.
I'm sorry, Dave.
No, that's all.
No, I just like to add to the fact that to me, I'm not an athlete. I wanted to be, but I wasn't good enough. But I happened to be good enough in the studying of music that came along, and I knew I had to be a certain level. And when I go to these school systems all throughout this country, and every school has a sports program that gives every single youth a chance. But the arts and music, especially over the last 70 years, it's sold to kids, but it's not given to them. It is not taught to them. So you're just actually you're waiting for a company to pimp your kids.
Yeah.
We'll sell you anything because you don't know about it. Matter of fact, we'll sell you the same thing over and over again in new packages. And I just think that high schools and middle schools, elementary schools, sports is revered, art is down here. And to me, I think more people are into art than even sports.
Mm-hmm.
We should get some other voices in the mix.
What I was trying to say to you, though, was just simply, I want to be respected in my rock and roll, in my music life, for my music, that as a listener, as a historian, whatever. I want to be respected, but I want to be respected for being respectable. I want to be respectable for being the dirtbag that I am.
And we do respect you for the dirtbag that you are, Dave.
Yeah, I know, it's great.
But Dave, there's still levels. There's high level and low level, and you see.
Well, that's
it,
that.
There's a writer that if there's a writer that comes along and you see that they're just writing bullshit, and don't know what they're talking about, you have an obligation to check that bullshit. You'd be like, yo, dude, or sit that person down like, you can't write no books right now. You need to write a paragraph right. You can't write a book in text language.
Well, actually, you know, I'm not exactly known for not saying things like that. So,
Yeah.
You know.
I'm sure we've got a lot of questions out there, so we can get that process started. And in the meantime, one of our questions coming along in the Twitter feed, a question for you, Chuck. Which artists right now do you think are speaking with real kind of freedom, that are really speaking
I like
the way you admire?
I like the artists that actually speak outside of their music, like the Roots. But then, you know, there's artists that haven't been acknowledged, like the Talib Kweli's, and there's a whole gigantic undercurrent of artists who now record in their homes, recording on their phones, they're involved on the internet. And my thing is this, is because you don't have enough people who are able to judge and survey the amount of art that's out there. So they said, you know, I'll just wait whatever floats to the majors. I'll wait to whatever floats to the mainstream top. And if it comes at me, then I'll judge it. But I won't go through 685,000 MP3s to see who's talking to people. I do radio shows for WBAI, and I have my own rap radio internetwork. And I have to like really seriously go through 50 MP3s to find two. And I just got to do it, or I have to build a staff.
That always was true. And I think right now the answer to the question is too numerous to mention, too numerous for you and me between the two of us with our different listening styles to know all. But I was with Garland Jeffries yesterday, 68 years old. And he's still talking about what matters. And so, and then next week I might be with somebody who's 19, doing my radio show, who's doing the same thing. It's not, that's the hard part of it is it's not predictable. It's not predictable what style, it's not predictable what age, it's not predictable what gender, it's not predictable what sexual preference, it's no longer predictable any longer what language or what country.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a great thing. In a way we want.
I think also as anybody, it's up for grabs. Technology has made it up for grabs for somebody to be the Dylan for the moment.
Yeah.
For example, they murdered Troy Davis in Georgia. Hip hop used to be bold enough on the upper echelon, on the mid-mainstream, to actually answer to that. But instead you had an undercurrent of many artists and poets that said, you know what, I'm going to record something on my cell phone, and I'm going to make a record on how fucked up it was for them to kill Troy Davis, and that song is relevant for today. So it moves with the technology, and I think we need to pay attention to that, because I don't think that you can compete against the moment of truth with something that you kind of like process, and you go through the motions, and you got the clearances, and it's going to be released next July.
Yeah, and you know, like when the 1070 thing happened, the anti-immigration law happened in Arizona, a group it was actually kind of a well-known group, Los Sensables, they did one of the best things that I heard or saw, but it was just on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instant Karma. It's like John Lennon's Instant Karma record coming out like that.
Yeah.
We got a lot of questions out there, so why don't we start over there? You, that looks like you.
You've made clear your views that folks ought to have the right to sing pretty much whatever they want to. But you're all sort of influential thought leaders with your various constituent groups. Do you feel that it's, whether they have the right to do it, whether there's something wrong with the somewhat pervasive misogynistic gay bashing, women bashing, somewhat violent themed that pervades a lot of, not all, but a lot of the
Christian theology?
What's that?
A lot of Christian theology, you were going to say?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to help you finish your sentence.
Well, let's We'll keep it focused on.
No, let's not. Let's really deal with
first
the
answer
whole
the question.
society we deal with. Let's deal with the whole society we'll deal with, and then you can wonder what percentage is what.
Well, let me just ask the question. Does it not trouble you? You just feel like anything's fair game? Or do you think in your positions, and people like you ought to communicate one way or another to folks that maybe it's not good, that maybe it's wrong to advocate violence to women or gays?
What makes you think we don't?
Yeah, that's the most baffling question I've
Well, how do you?
Kembrew, you want to?
Well, I mean, so first of all, I think all of us on this panel, I know all of us have done exactly what you said, which is, advocate against homophobia, so on. But yeah, the reason why I like Dave Marsh's quip, like he finished your sentence by plugging in the term Christian theology. Let's look at our society.
Who takes more hits for it?
Yeah,
Preachers or rappers?
And I don't like listening to it. I'm a teacher. I've definitely talked to my students about, more constructive ways of expressing yourself. But it's not like, misogyny and homophobia and so on is contained only in the world of rap music and metal or whatever. Music. I mean, that's just absurd. It's an expression of the kind of crap that goes on in our society and the kind of crap that churches have, endorsed for many, many years.
I like to add on is that, I challenge artists from minute one about their beliefs before they even write the song. Like, do you really believe that? And you get the truth out, I'm like, hey, look, dude, I'm trying to get some money and get a girl. I'm like, well, then you have to figure out, like, all right, then you're abusing the freedom of speech here because you don't truly even believe in that bullshit. But we've seen rewards to be fake. We've seen the abuse of the freedom of speech for the sake of commerce and big companies putting out whatever. And I just think I'm in the area of creation. I train producers. I train artists to be able to say, all right, you're going to write a song. What are you going to write? You're going to write a song. If you're going to come up with a point of view, make sure you back it up. If you can't back it up, then, anything that you do, you should be able to back it up. If you truly don't believe in what you're saying, then, I have to make up in my mind, well, you're not paying a service to the art form that is beneficial to the whole planet. Around the world, people speak what they believe in the art form of rap music and hip hop. I've been to 78 countries. I'm fortunate to go and understand when a person's really seriously saying, F this government, they're really going up against a grain that might be, impeding upon their personal existence. But they really truly are saying something that they believe in for their freedoms. Here there happens to be certain abuses that we need to answer to if we're in the area of creation. If we're in the area of, okay, we have the airwaves, we want to balance it. Okay, this person's going to come out, and this is how they really feel, because his girlfriend jerked him when he was 16 years old, so he hates women. Okay, then somebody needs to sit down and talk to this person and say, oh, this is how you feel? And give them therapy, maybe, I don't know. But, this whole thing of I do things because everybody feels this way is some bullshit to me. That's just real talk. There's 1.67 million black men in prison. That's not a song. That's a reality. They're building bigger prisons by the day in a large amount of these states in the United States. There's something out there, obviously, then more than a song that's leading them in there. It's a lack of a lot of different things, and there's a lot of hype and myth that's also leading people to believe things that they truly don't believe. So I want to somehow stop some of that.
I guess I would just throw in, not as a panelist, but as the only woman on the panel, there's been a lot of rock and roll, hip hop, all kinds of popular culture that's, I felt, has been hard to manage as a woman, but it's also the place where I've found tremendous freedom and strength, and it's it's all over the map, just like any art form. It can be as offensive to me to be at an NFL game sometimes as hearing a record. You know? So I don't isolate it to the music. It's kind of out there.
Well, have you ever ran into an artist or somebody in sports, and you know that they're known for doing this, but when you confront them, they're like, "Well, I don't really feel that way."
Yeah.
That's bullshit, though. You know.
It worked. It's sold.
It works. It's sold. That's made my living. So
You mean
therefore,
the Dixie Chicks didn't mean goodbye, Earl?
We got another one over here.
Yeah, hi. My name's Sean Watterson. I own a music venue here in town. First, thanks for doing the panel. The question I have is, it seems like since with the technology advances, we've talked a lot about the history of censorship and the people in power trying to silence the people, trying to voice themselves through music. With YouTube, with the ability to put music out directly, it seems like the content isn't so much an issue, a censorship of content issue. What I'm seeing, and I think it came up in what Chuck D was saying about cutting off funding to the arts, and for us locally, other subtle ways that limit people's ability to be artists and express themselves. You know, we're dealing with issues, the noise ordinances in Cleveland are being revised, and there's a healthy debate about how that's going to impact the music community. We're also involved in issues on trying to get exemptions from a high admissions tax. These are things that aren't put in place to silence the music, but have an effect on limiting our ability to nourish these voices. And I wanted to hear from the panel what your thoughts were on how to shine a light on these other things that might be limiting our ability to generate these voices.
I'll be real quick, and then I'll pass the mic. New censorship over the last 20 years with the consolidation of these radio networks, being LA, New York centric. You're a Cleveland artist. You can't be heard on the free air in Cleveland. Therefore, you can't get broadcasted across the northern Ohio region on free air because there's not a home for you to promote you as an Ohio, Cleveland artist to your own local community as much as somebody with a major corporation who you hear 15 times a day. This has destroyed local music in this country. It's destroyed black music in this country, where it's a slavery plantation type of thing like, well, I got to sign with Universal, Universe all. Well, I got to sign to this New York company in order to get heard back in my hometown of Cleveland. To me, that's the biggest censorship of it all. It's stifled local voices. It's stifled local musicianship. And in 50 states, and in 55 to 65 major cities in this country, you have arts and local music communities who have been making records for the last 40 years who struggle to be heard in their own city or their own town and can't make a living. If you can't get broadcasted in your own local area, across the free air, and you say, well, you know what, this belongs to Clear Channel, belongs to one of these radio station groups, and you got to be part of that game, that's the biggest censorship of artists in the last 15 to 20 years.
Well, I think actually that's older. I mean, I can remember doing this over Detroit music in Detroit in the 60s, you know, and I think the thing is that we have this commercial monopoly on the free air, meaning the free air and free, and the social media have an effect on that. But I think, you know, these other factors, which are often economically driven, and I'm sure that noise ordinance thing is, and, you know, and that cuts all different kinds of ways within that community, you know, but why is it aimed at music and not bulldozers? Because bulldozers make money. You know, the bulldozers start up at 7 o'clock. You had a night shift, you can't sleep. You know? So it's you know, what you're identifying is a form of cultural conflict that goes very, very deep. And we really only usually talk about culture in terms of the arts, but culture is, you know, is a lot of things.
That's how we live. Question on this side.
Yes. Chuck D., you made an interesting observation, which is sort of in really the mid-'90s, where what I would consider the golden age of hip-hop, both Public Enemy, NWA, sort of even I think Tupac would sort of be towards the end of that, was de facto suppressed in a way because of the particular types of things that you all were singing about. Much more social commentary, a lot less of as you said, that is for life. There are, however, some exceptions, I think, that have existed in recent times. I think Eminem is one, which sort of culminated in White America, and I would even say Marsh, but also some others like Cannabis and Immortal Technique, who are not, I wouldn't consider them really heavy sellers or even well known, but nonetheless, they are very political groups, and they have a political message. And I guess, is there something that you think allows them to be able to make a living selling records, making poignant social commentary that really since the 90s has sort of been suppressed? Yeah, they're independent and they have a low ceiling, and they have a good understanding of who they are in their constituency or where they're going to go with it, you know. So I taught the Immortal Technique 2 days ago. He's very clear on what his terrain is. I'm saying that as a general mainstream point of view, what had taken place in the mid-'90s all the way up to now, it's like it's easy to say, well, kill a nigga, shoot a nigga, house a nigga, I hate that nigga, and I'm a nigga, as opposed to like, well, you know, I have a problem with this particular government issue here. I have a particular problem with these people who are my landlords. I have a particular problem with my religion and that religion. That has just been like, whew, moved out of the way. Not to say it's better or even more right, but it just seemed like the other stuff had floated to the top to be the end-all, be-all in mainstream opinion, which over the last 15 years has depicted the reflection of a people. And older black folks look at this like, well, I don't even know where this came from. Who pushes the button here? And you turn on the television and what's socially acceptable wouldn't ride 25 years ago to black folks. But it's like, yeah, it's cool, it's all right. And it's like, all right, who said it's all right? Somebody's behind. Jimmy Iovine is behind Eminem. The strings that Jimmy Iovine has done behind pulling the strings in the music industry has been one-sided. One-sided entirely. Now, I'm looking at it maybe stubbornly from a biased black man point of view, but that's just how it is. It's unfair, it's unbalanced. And everything needs to have equal right to speak and be heard.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, you know what? You got to hear this. I think you got my flag from my movie hanging in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I made a movie in 1972 called Superfly. Me and 4 guys from Glenville High School. We made one of the biggest movies of all time from right here in Glenville, right here in Cleveland. Now, what I'm going to say is real important because I dictated the story to the fellow who wrote that movie. It was about my mentor growing up. My mentor was good friends in Cleveland with Carl Stokes and Don King. And they decided when they were little boys in the projects on Central Avenue that they were going to live by their wit instead of their grit, meaning they wasn't going to work for nobody. Now, they lived a life as hustlers, as young men. And when I got to be 13 or 14, I became associated with Scatter, is the name of this gentleman's name. And I looked at his world, and it was the hustling world. And he used to trade Cadillacs 2 and 3 times a year. He was friends with Sugar Ray Robinson, Fidel Castro. He was friends with heads of state. They were real big, you know. And I looked at this lifestyle. Now, he wanted me to be a lawyer, you know. But like T.I. said to Denzel Washington in American Gangster, you know, when he asked him how come he didn't go try out for the baseball, He said, Uncle Frank, I don't want to be no baseball player. I want to be you. And that was me to scatter. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be him. You know, now...
So do you want to frame that in a question?
Well, I don't have a question. I don't have a question. But what I want to say is, it's an ideology. It's an ideology. I was addicted to an ideology. What we're watching now, and like Chuck, they're just making movies. I mean, they're just making music. Like, we denied doing anything wrong with Superfly, but we glamorized the drug dealer, and millions of people copied that image. You know, now I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for 40 years, and I know that kids are getting addicted to this stuff. They're getting addicted to them beats, to them lyrics, to the image, to the hats to the side, to the pants down. Those are overt signs of pathology. That's illness. You know, now the rappers can say they're not doing anything wrong, not that we're just making music, but you know, when Jay-Z takes off that suit and tie and turns his hat to the side and gets on stage and does that, how many millions of kids are going to watch that and try to be like that? They can't be rappers, but they're going to get twisted.
I'm getting the hook on my time, so do you want to hear some commentary back on that before we have to wrap up?
It's an ideology. It's a social disease. Okay. It's a mental illness.
Anybody want to respond to that? It's our last. Chuck, do you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's underneath the radar. Underneath the radar influence, if you have a people who truly, seriously are united and don't know themselves, they could be replaced with large images coming from some place that shows their face, that shows their exterior, and gives them a whole different sense of worth or worthlessness. And it's already been diagnosed as like systems and mind control come through high forms of emission. So, you know, the brother is right. I mean, when there's a problem in the black community, this problem is unseen until it starts floating to the top, and you have a large contingent of white kids that all of a sudden start being that way. Then there's a problem. And this has been going on for like 30 to 40 years. It's nothing new. But now, you know, you get to a point where, like, what turns this around? How do you go from 100,000 black men in prison in 1970 to 1.7 million? What happened in that 40-year period? Somebody got to come up with something. It's got to be something.
Thank you, guys. This is where all this stuff gets fought out in the music.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, panelists. This City Club conference is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.